in tournaments where the games come fast and furious, the training is compromised. It's how the players think and behave during the game that Nafuzi has to solve. If Nafuzi cannot solve that, don't be surprised if by the end of this year his reign will be cut short and FA Football Association Malaysia will be compelled to find a foreign coach who would be able to do what Nafuzi couldn't. A meek result, a meek outcome, and eventually a meek exit from the 2025 ASEAN Under-23 Championships Mandiri Cup at the group stage after Malaysia Under-23s drew 0-0 with host Indonesia in their final Group A match at the Gelora Bung Karno Stadium earlier tonight. The bigness of the performance was seen in the way where, despite their best efforts, it was clear they were trying, especially in the second half, where they knew that they needed the goals to have a slim chance of reaching the next round of the tournament, even though the hopes were slim. But eventually the goals never came. The closest they had was a shot from Alif Izwan, and everything just petered out towards a rather sorry exit and a not so pleasant international debut tournament for the Harimau Muda Under-23 coach since he took charge of this squad at the start of the year. It is indeed a huge baptism of fire for Nafuzi Zain and much of his coaching staff, as well as many of the players who were playing at this level, and with only a handful having previously played for the national team. So with that context in mind, to have to perform beyond the levels of what they had shown, even in the second game when they demolished Brunei 7-1, there was still obvious chinks in the game that needed fixing, and when Brunei, the weakest nation in the 4-team group, could cause problems for Malaysia defense. Yes, Brunei, and even managed to score their only goal of the tournament even though they were trailing by 5-6 goals by then. It was indicative of the way how the entire Malaysia team as a collective was playing, particularly in defense, and for tonight's case, the damning department was in midfield, where they barely had any control of proceedings in the middle of the park. And this was in huge contrast to the hosts, who under Dutch coach Jaro van der Berg, an experienced veteran coach who has prior experience guiding the elite youth teams at the top Netherlands clubs in the Eredivisie. He was able to guide this experience to ensure that those players, several of whom have actually played under Shin Tae-yong in last year's ASEAN Championship for the national team, to transition seamlessly from the Korean approach of play to the more Dutch-centric approach of play. And this was evident from the get-go. It was not just playing the 4-3-3 formation. It was not just playing to the system that the Dutch were used to. The Indonesians knew that a draw was enough, but yet they chose to play as though they needed a win to get through to the semi-finals, despite having already one foot on it following a second successive win over the week a few days ago when they defeated the Philippines 1-0. After all, when all they needed was a draw, they could play it safe. But for much of the game, they did not. Perhaps by the last 10 minutes, where it was obvious that Malaysia were not going to impose any significant threat. But otherwise, Indonesia played as though they needed something to progress into the semi-finals of the tournament. And within the first few minutes, they came out all guns blazing. By the first 15 minutes or so, I think, by the first 15 minutes, Malaysia had to face a barrage of long throw-ins by Robbie Darwis. They were fortunate that Robbie Darwis, the thrower of all 5 long throws, did not possess the same spin or potent effect the way the Indonesian international fullback Pramatan Ahan would have when it comes to such long throw situations. So Malaysia were comfortable in dealing with that. But still, when it comes to the Malaysia under-23s, they were particularly disappointing in the first half. It is already damning that when even Brunei can find ways to poke holes on the Malaysian defence, Indonesia only needed to do was to put 3 men high up the pitch and make them as uncomfortable as possible. How uncomfortable did they get? They got so uncomfortable, I think that Ashraf Hadi was the centre-back particularly targeted because of the lack of confidence in the way he was playing as the right side centre-back alongside Captain Ubaidillah Samsu of Terengganu. The JD2 defender looked at times lost, and while on occasion managed to wriggle his way out of trouble with a little individual skill, but the lack of control of the ball after receiving the short goal kick was damning, really damning. It seemed like Malaysia throughout this whole ASEAN Under-23 Championships never got into gear from the get-go. They were perhaps unlucky in the first game when they hit the woodwork thrice, but the goals really matter in the end, not how many times you hit against the bar or the woodwork. And Philippines delivered on that front, not Malaysia. Malaysia did better attacking in the second game, but their defense was at times in all kinds of knots against Brunei, whom, despite being technically inferior, managed to sniff out certain vulnerabilities in the Malaysian defense. And perhaps the Malaysians should be thankful that the Indonesians were in a way not in that predatory mood to be as ruthless as they could usually have done. If they had, it could have ended in a rather embarrassing defeat for Nafuzi Zaid, the second defeat in 3 matches, which would have been a huge shock, a huge slap on every under-23 player's face, because they had sacrificed, for a number of them, is their senior team pre-season commitments to come and play in this pre-tournament. For others, it's a step up from the usual youth academies, big for their potential to feature as part of their build-up towards the AFC Under-23 Asian Cup qualifies in September, and the December Southeast Asian Games Men's Football Tournament in Thailand. So this is a huge baptism of fire for many of those players and for their head coach Nafuzi, who has actually built up a solid club reputation for being able to guide first Kedah and then Terengganu to play attractive attacking football, was found himself thrown rather into a deep end, having never had such kind of coaching experience even as an assistant, to see how the international game is like. Because one thing is for sure, coaching the Malaysian under-23 national team is really not the same as coaching at club level, whether it's previously Kedah, Terengganu, or any club in the future. At club level football, mistakes happen, and especially whether it's against stronger teams or particularly against teams of a similar level like them. He has been able to use the imports and also some of the better local players to exploit and play fast play with quick transitions from defense to attack moving forward. But against Indonesia tonight, Nafuzi can lay out the tactics. The execution still has to be laid by the players. But save for one or two, in the first 45 minutes in particular, Harimau Muda, the under 23 players, they were found wanting, particularly wanting. The transition went nowhere. The midfield kept losing the ball, kept surrendering the ball, turning over the possession to the Indonesians. And the Indonesians were very happy to keep possession of the ball for much of the first half. They were very happy to play with their own tempo and force Malaysia to keep digging deep within their box. It is also pretty damning for Nafuzi and his coaching staff when your centre forward Fergus Tierney was doing a lot more at the back inside his own box rather than creating trouble for the Indonesian back four at the other end of the pitch, having to deal with huge clearances, marking against similarly tall players or strong players, having to use his power with some effect. Fergus was spending a lot more time defending with some distinction than going forward as what his position in the starting 11 was supposed to be. Granted, Indonesia were pinning them back for much of the first half. Granted, Fergus, being one of the bigger and stronger players in the squad, would be utilised in defensive set play situations. But still, it's pretty damning that the defenders and Fergus were defending more. What happened to the rest of the players? What happened to even Alif Izwan? What happened to even Alif Izwan? In the second half, he came to life, but in the first half, he was rather anonymous. And especially on Malaysia's left side, Indonesia kept attacking. They were very fortunate on a number of occasions not to even fall behind at all throughout the game. Because Indonesia had, in their starting 11, they named several players who have played in the ASEAN Championship. Yes, the national team level, the main one, last year. So they have had some tournament experience. I mean, for the Indonesian side, I can rattle on who were in the starting 11. Their goalkeeper, Chaya Supriyadi. Their captain, Donitri Pamungkas. Then you also have Robbie Dawes, Hanan, number 8, their number 8. Victor Dehan, their right winger, their right side forward, who was a constant menace, not just attacking on the right. Even towards the end of the first half, he nearly created an assist that could have totally shattered Malaysia by cutting in from the left. And Malaysian defenders seemed to have no clue how to stop Victor Dehan. They had no clue how to stop quite a number of others as well. They really had no clue. They were just running around and trying to just hope for the best. That was how bad Malaysia were in the first half. The only silver lining was they did not concede at halftime. Neither did they concede in the end. Because when first the Philippines and even Brunei managed to score, there was a damning problem at the back. And Brunei, even though they only scored one goal, they could have scored a few more in their second game against Malaysia. And Indonesia, with stronger attackers in their position, John Raven was quite active in the Malaysia box. A missed bicycle kick in the second half and all. It could have been, it's like a few chances. It could have been Indonesia's dominant game, dominant victory. But one thing the Indonesians knew what to do, that Malaysia only woke up in the second half. Game management. Indonesia knew that they could go for the win, but a draw would not hurt them either, because either outcome would secure top place in Group A. Malaysia, on the other hand, they needed a victory, and not just a one-goal victory. A one-goal victory would have eliminated them if Philippines had beaten Brunei by any score, as it actually also happened when the Philippines eventually defeated the bottom team 2-0 to finish second in the group. So there was no case of a potential three-way tie where Malaysia defeated Indonesia to see all teams level on 6 points, which means a 1-0 win would not have been enough. What they needed was, before the game, 4 goals. But when they had nothing to show for going forward in the first half, in general, that was as good as half the game lost. Even though it was still goalless for Malaysia, Indonesia could afford to take their time to compose their passes, and they showed that they have actually transitioned well from Shin Tae-yong to Gerald van der Berg. Yes, they have that exposure of playing tournament football under Shin Tae-yong at the main national team level. They also learn how to take control of the game and control the flow, save for the first 15 minutes of the second half. Indonesia saw the game out without much trouble, save for a few yellow cards and a number of fouls they committed. Quite robust, but not at the level where that Nusantara derby at under 23 level was getting red hot. Not at all. So after Donny Tree, the captain, he actually not Donny Tree, Kadek, my apologies, is I think Kadek Rudianto. He was the one who nearly put Indonesia in front 2 minutes into added time in the first half. After that, Indonesia nearly did it again, but Raven failed to, the only Dutch-born player in the starting 11. So he failed to connect the ball with his bicycle kick. And that's why I bring forth at this point. Van der Berg managed to transform this Indonesian team from a counter-attacking side under Shin Tae-yong into a possession-based side, being able to play passing football, of the localized version of total football, without needing any heritage players inside their 11. That was the strong point in which Van der Berg has managed to instill into those players. The players have already learned tournament football, how to do with certain tactics under Shin Tae-yong. Van der Berg applied the technical touches, applied the fundamentals of needing to control the game, to manage the game, and to keep possession, and to know when to frustrate the opponents as and when they need it, especially when Van der Berg, the coaching staff, and the young Indonesians on the pitch all knew that Malaysia had the harder and had the shorter end of the stick when it comes to the permutation. When Indonesia knew that Malaysia had to score, as Des Kokyo mentioned too, but in the head-to-head, if all three really did end on 6 points, 1-0 or 2-0 victory was not enough. Philippines were going to go through on goal difference. 3-0 still not enough. Philippines will still have gone through on the back of their 2-0 win, despite the same goal difference. Only a 4-0 win will suffice, and that was a very tall order Nafuzi Zain's boys had to face. But after being so timid in the first half, they finally woke up in the first quarter of the second half, first 15 minutes of second half rather. It's like Ali Pizwan took charge. He shot wide from the edge of the box on the 50th minute, and then on the 53rd minute, an outrageous free kick attempt from 35 yards. Had Chaya not managed to tip it over the bar, it could have been one of the goals of the tournament. such was the execution, such was the way he placed the ball and swerved towards its intended destination and goal. From the almighty 30 yards, not 25 yards or even 30, 35 or a bit more. It was an audacious attempt. It was a sign of desperation, but Alif Izwan was one of the more outstanding players for Harimau Malaya in the second half, and it showed when he was the one pulling the team by on his own at the scruff of their necks and push it forward. Then you also had and during the period when Malaysia were briefly on the ascendancy, Indonesia still had the means to launch a counter-attack from the opposite half that could have ended the game outright had Shafizan Ashad not intervened with that sliding tackle fair on the side, not from behind, on the side, to stop a goal scoring opportunity from Raven. Had that not been done, it would have been game over. Yes, Malaysia once again got lucky a number of times today, stopping Indonesia where they failed to stop the Philippines and Brunei from scoring in their net. And that aside, once again, solid defending. 58th minute, the Indonesians were upping their tempo too. For that period where it was getting everybody on the edge, denied by a defensive block, Raven could have gone home with at least 2 or 3 goals to add to the 6 he scored against Brunei. But it was indicative of a better collective defensive effort, although not as satisfactory or complete, because, as I mentioned earlier, their forwards, when they were pressing high up the pitch, they were able to exploit the uncertainty of the Malaysian defenders when they had the ball, and they were quick to exploit. Not just once, a few occasions, they made the defender on the ball hesitate, and either he had to scramble or on occasion pull off an individual skill to beat the guy who is challenging him on the ball. But it was not tidy defending, it was not tidy possession. And despite the improvements in defense, in attack in the second half, the midfield again was rather disappointing, and it showed as Malaysia lost their momentum after a rather bright start to the second half. Once again, the midfield in particular showed the same problem. They got the ball, they regained possession, the next moment you know it, turn over again, and Indonesia were never under pressure to regain possession. Sometimes it was simply a gift of a misplaced pass or a hurried pass in the mad rush to try to score a goal, which never happened. All Indonesia knew had to do is they had to keep things tight at the back, they had to keep the ball, they have to play with composure, and their job will be done. And as the minutes went by, that was exactly what Indonesia did. A handful of fouls here and there, but Indonesia did enough. A goalless draw at the final whistle. Gerald van der Berg was able to get his team to click into gear without needing too many Dutch-born players, which was rather impressive because these were the same players who at times struggled under Shin Tae-yong's system in the ASEAN Championship at the main national team level last year. But they had matured, they had learned the basics of what it means to play in an international tournament, and those guys who had played in the ASEAN Championship had shown at the under-23 level that they were a few levels above the Malaysians in handling the game situation. And as I mentioned earlier, the Indonesians were able to incorporate the Dutch concepts into their play. You never do see the Indonesians hurrying them to play a quick pass or quick move without thinking of a few steps ahead, without seeing the whole layout of the play. Unlike the Malaysian, rather unfortunate, maybe it was not typical for Nafuzi Zain to do it, but he would have probably done it on a number of occasions at club level. And when push came to shove, Nafuzi actually probably did the route 1 method from defense, quickly switch to attack, relying on the wingers to create the trust and hopefully providing the pass, the killer pass for the center forward to finish. While they provided the trust in the second half for brief moments, it was not the same. The trust was not there. The Indonesians were better prepared for this than the Malaysians going forward. Then in Indonesia's case, their passing, it was not hurried. They were patient in their approach. They may have their odds turnovers at the other end, but they were never found guilty of causing any potentially tragic turnover within their own first third, and that was crucial. Van der Berg, in those few months that he has taken over the under-23 team, has drilled them into one cohesive unit that is now at least capable of being among the best in Southeast Asia at this age group, and also puts Indonesia in good state ahead of the knockout stages, and also even in the AFC Under-23 Asian Cup qualifiers, and their gold medal defense in the SEA Games Men's Football Tournament in December. What about Nafuzi Zain and the Malaysian Under-23s? After this result, after this rather patchy performance at best, after providing brief glimpses of hope, but that Herculean task of scoring 2 goals or 4 goals proved to be too much for Malaysia to overcome. They focused too much on defense. They really got away from conceding when the danger was already evident on a number of occasions. If the Indonesians had turned up a gear or two, it could have easily been Indonesia 4, Malaysia 0. So the Malaysians had to be thankful that they ended their campaign with a point to add to the 3 points they had against Brunei. But it does not make for good reading overall. I hope at the end of this tournament, Nafuzi Zain has finally understood and learned what tournament football in international football is really like. This is not the same as your Malaysia Liga Super, where sometimes you can play a bit loose with your tactics in the hope of getting a goal. Defenses tend to be more disciplined even at Southeast Asia level when they have the advantage. When they know what they needed to do, they will play the game the way they want and force the opponents to play to their tempo, to their beat, to their momentum, to their thinking, not the other way around. And that is the test that Nafuzi Zain did not pass in this elimination. In fact, one of the first things Nafuzi had to do once he and his team return home, they have to really grasp what actually international football coaching is really like. How to be able to keep to a similar level of game management the way the Indonesians have. That game management was missing even in the game against Brunei when they were dominant. The goal could have been avoided. The carelessness in their own half in conceding Brunei's only goal could have been avoided, and yet they failed. Why could they do it against Indonesia when the stakes were high, but not against Brunei and not against Philippines when they were touted initially among the more highly fancied teams to progress into the last 4 of the 10-nation competition? Why did they allow Brunei to make them feel pressured when Brunei were the minors of the group, the whipping boys? And then how about getting the best out of the players? You can't depend on Alif Izwan to bail the team out from playing on the wings, or Fergus Tierney bailing out in defensive set-piece situations instead of his role up front, or Ubaidillah Shamsu to actually lead the team and helping to calm the nerves of the more nervous defenders around him. And Zuhimi Sharani, he had a good outing catching crosses because none of Robbie Dawi's throws posed the same spin or concern the way Pramada Hans did. On an individual level, a number did okay, but it's one thing to whack 7-1 against Minos. Could they reprise that same level of performance to play a more cohesive attacking game that he had once promised to the media after he took up this job? And having learned the hard way how international football operates in Southeast Asia, especially in tournament football, it is back to the drawing board for Nafuzi Zaid. It's a chastening debut experience for him. It's a chastening experience for many of these players on how they are supposed to deal with it. Because in a tournament, the moment you fail to finish and the opponent scores, and especially in the group stage where games are played once every 2 days, it is going to be difficult to just recover and focus on 1 week. Unlike in league games where they could have a week to work on what went wrong during the game. In tournaments where the games come fast and furious, the training is compromised. It's how the players think and behave during the game that Nafuzi has to solve. If Nafuzi cannot solve that, don't be surprised if by the end of this year his reign will be cut short and FA Football Association Malaysia will be compelled to find a foreign coach who would be able to do what Nafuzi couldn't. And that is where the countdown begins. Unfortunately, the countdown towards avoiding dismissal, avoiding yet another tournament embarrassment begins for Nafuzi Zaid and his coaching staff. We can only hope that this entire Mandiri Cup, the ASEAN Under-23 Championship campaign, which ended on a whimper, 4 points, yes, but overall an abject campaign, a poor campaign by their standards. It is time for them to regroup, to go back to the drawing board, to define a system of play that gets the best out of the Malaysian players, not just your top defenders and Fergus Stanley and Alif Izon, but also the midfielders and the subs who came on, apart from Aiman Yusof, who showed some good glimpse of skill in that dribble that he managed to keep the ball right on the goal line, only for the final product to fail him in the second half. If Malaysia could produce more performances of this and get the midfield to click, then they could be in serious contention to qualify for next year's Under-23 Asian Cup and also be among the medal contenders in the SEA Games. But otherwise, it could be terima kasih and we move on to find a foreign coach for the Under-23 national team.